In this video, Jay Haynes and I are going to cover a fascinating concept called job to be done, which really helps you understand the needs of your client and build a company roadmap that will build on top of that and will lead to company growth.
Brilliant.
About 10 years ago, just had been restudying Clay Christensen's work, the famous professor who was most known for disruption, but really spent the last part of his career focused on jobs to be done. I just thought this is a much better way of thinking about customers. And ultimately, every company is serving its customers. And the basic idea behind jobs to be done is deceptively simple. It's that people actually aren't even buying products. What they're doing is they're hiring those products to get a job done. And we use the terminology of jobs to be done now, but basically people are trying to achieve goals in their lives. And those goals are jobs to be done. So, and that's true for any consumer markets, business markets, and medical markets. So for example, if you're a new parent, one of the jobs you need to get done is get your baby to sleep through the night. If you're a busy professional, you need to get to a destination on time, which is why we hire Apple and Google Maps. If you're a human resources executive, you need to optimize your workforce. If you are in sales, you need to acquire customers. If you are a medical professional and you're a cardiovascular surgeon, you need to restore artery blood flow. So the basic idea is you can take any market that's traditionally defined by a product, like the iPod market, for example, and you can redefine that market using your customer's job.
I think now we kind of generally understand the concept, but what is really job to be done? Is it a methodology? Is it a system? Is it a framework? Like, what is it?
Yeah, it's all of those. It's a framework and a process and a method of identifying unmet customer needs in a market. So, of course, if you're going to innovate and if you're going to accelerate your growth, you might be on a growth path that's 10%, 20%, whatever. But if you're really going to accelerate your growth, meaning double your growth rate, for example, and that's where you really create enormous value, is that acceleration. You have to understand where your customers' unmet needs are. Where are they struggling today? And if you look at the current products in the market, they're not going to tell you where your customers are struggling. So this is why things like net promoter scores, which companies use a lot, they're interesting, but they don't tell you whether or not your roadmaps can accelerate your growth. Because you could look at NPS scores for iPods, but that doesn't represent a growth opportunity. That just tells you the current state of the world that people like their iPods. The first step is really understand the complexity of what your customers need to get done. Then the second part is figuring out where they struggle today. Where are they struggling? Because if you as a company, if you want to satisfy the unmet needs of your customer, you need to know what they are and where to prioritize. So if you were going to try and beat Apple and Google Maps, for example, do people struggle with estimating the departure time, or do they struggle with planning their stops? Or do they struggle with parking the vehicle, right? You'd want to analyze that to say, is there enough of a struggle with that job? And are people willing to pay for something new that would help them get the job done better? And that's the starting point. That is what you would call understanding your customer's problem. The key is that all of those activities your companies are doing are centered on your customer. And companies today, they talk about this, right? They want to be customer centric. They want to be customer focused. But what does that mean? Your customer is just the center of every activity. If you're going to invest in your roadmap, what is your confidence that investment in your roadmap is going to turn into accelerated revenue growth? That is the key question for every executive, for every board, for every shareholder, every stakeholder. Is the company on the roadmap? Part of what jobs to be done is a risk mitigation system. So before you pour all that money into your roadmap, make sure that you have a pretty good assessment that you're on the right path. Another famous quote that we love is from Frank Lloyd Wright. And he said, famously, you can fix it in the drafting room with an eraser, or you can fix it on the construction site with a sledgehammer. The drafting room is where you're still in the concept level. And that's what our tool helps you do, is make sure you're doing all this work up front to make sure your team agrees, your customers are really excited about it, you understand their problems, And then ultimately, when you get out to the construction site, you don't have to use a sledgehammer.
The other thing, I don't know, are you familiar with Play Bigger or Christopher Lochhead, category design? So he talks a lot about the way that companies become successful is by creating new categories that will help solve a problem that, a big group of customers either don't know they have, or they don't know there's a good enough solution for it. And really what you're describing is the how to do category design properly in the first step, which maybe is the biggest gap I ever heard about category design, is the how part of it. If I want to implement this in my company today, whether it's an established company or I'm just getting started, what do I need to do? What are the steps? What resources do I need to bring in order to be a part of this process, in order to really put myself on a place where I'll be heading in the right direction?
So the first step, I would say, is getting agreement with your team that you want to assess your real growth opportunities.
Okay.
That if you have extremely high confidence in your roadmap and you think we're on the right path, that's fantastic. And companies do succeed, of course. I think the best companies are doing what we now formalize as jobs to be done. Like you're saying, Isar, in your example, you spent those 6 months and you really understood your customer, not from what product you're going to build, but just like, what are they struggling with? That's essential. So if you're going to really adopt jobs to be done, the first thing is get your team to recognize that this is a valuable activity to undertake, because it's going to mitigate your risk and ultimately end up in accelerated growth. And that's an executive level conversation. We work with everybody from CEOs and board members down to product managers. And that's okay. You can start anywhere in your organization with that, but you really want to start to socialize this, that, hey, perhaps we can find a better way to be more successful consistently. A lot of this work is actually pretty interesting, is before you even have any product. And sometimes, we like to joke that our competitive advantage is we have no ideas because we're not trying to create the ideas first. You want to understand your customers' problems first and then come up with the ideas. You do not want your customers coming up with your ideas. They don't have any idea about the latest machine learning or AI technology or whatever whiz bang gizmo or widget that's out there. That's not their role. It's, we use the example of cooks. You could ask cooks a million questions. They're never going to come up with a microwave, right? I have no idea what a microwave is. It's like this little nuclear reactor in my house, right? But they could absolutely a cook could tell you everything about how they struggle to prepare food. And that's what you want to look at, because that's obviously the job they're trying to get done. The product strategy is simply understanding which job you're going to target for your customer and where they struggle the most. And then once you have that, you can then start to evaluate all the product ideas you have in your roadmap. You can create new ideas if you need to. I wouldn't make investment decisions on who knows and guessing.
Yes.
But the most successful entrepreneurs, in our view, are not risk takers. And this is one of the Silicon Valley kind of myths of the swashbuckling risk taker. No one wants to take risk. Yeah. The best entrepreneurs are risk mitigators. And your example actually of being an entrepreneur inside a corporation is a great example of successful entrepreneurship, because you spent all the time saying, wait, we're going to mitigate all the risk. And the number one risk, certainly today, for entrepreneurs and startups is market risk, because there was a lot of technology risk back in the late 90s building a company. I, as an entrepreneur, sat there in the facility screwing servers into a rack and hoping that it all worked when we turned it on. Now you just fire up a line of AWS code and you got a server going, right? Yeah. Technology risk is very, very low, unless you're trying to do something like create an mRNA vaccine or, cure. Best entrepreneurs really mitigate all the risks in the market because they really listen to customers.